Chapter 6. Cuphead writes an essay. "Are you going to the carnival, Cuphead?" Ginger asked him. Ginger was a gingerbread girl who sat in the desk directly behind Cuphead's. Like most gingerbread girls, she was sweet. A little on the nosy side, maybe, but sweet. "Well," said Cuphead, climbing to his feet and setting his desk upright. "Of course he's going. Everyone's going," Canteen Hughes interrupted. "What kind of lame brain would miss the carnival? Did you see the roller coaster? It's a real doozy." Roller coaster? There was a roller coaster? Cuphead gulped. He'd seen roller coasters in the newsreel at the movies. They looked like trains that got caught in a tornado and didn't know how to get out. Suddenly he imagined his entire row of desks climbing up a tall track and swoosh, plunging down the other side. It was terrifying. The awful thought made his skin break out in goosebumps, and, before he knew it, they were waddling down his arms and making embarrassing honking noises. "Boy, oh boy, a roller coaster," he said extra loudly. "I can hardly wait." It was the best he could come up with at the moment. The truth was, although Cuphead was very brave, the idea of getting on a roller coaster made him queasy. He wasn't scared, of course. Not really scared. It was more of an allergy. Yeah, that's it. He was allergic to being brutally mangled, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. So even though the carnival sounded like a swell place filled with all kinds of things that didn't twist or turn or flip upside down and give you an upset stomach, he would give almost anything to see them. His hands were tied. If he were to set one foot in the world of wonders, the rest of the gang would expect him to join them on the dipping, diving death machine, and that was not going to happen. Still, it was a shame to miss the whole carnival over one little roller coaster. It was like not eating an ice cream sundae just because someone put a snake in it. And who knew when he'd have this chance again? Maybe if he was extra careful and stayed way over on the other side of the grounds, then... No. Elder Kettle had told him to keep away from it, and that's exactly what he was going to do. The birthday party would be thrilling enough, thank you very much. "Quiet down, class," Professor Lucien said. "Your assignment this morning is to write an essay." The class groaned. Lucien straightened his mortarboard and gave them a long, stern look. "And the topic," he continued, "is what I want to be when I grow up." Cuphead's eyes popped wide open. Usually essays were dull, boring, torturous projects about history or science or books. But this was about something important. At last, he could tell the world exactly what the future held for a boy named Cuphead. Then the praise would come rolling in. He picked up his pencil. Rats! The tip was dull. This would never do. You couldn't write sharp literature with a dull pencil. With no time to spare, he quickly chewed on the end like a wood chipper until it had a shiny new point. Now it was an instrument worthy of the task. He put it to the paper. "What I want to be when I grow up, by Cuphead," he wrote. It sounded so boffo already. Ah, the future. He pictured it 1,000 times. It was going to be glorious. Cuphead leaned back in his desk and let the daydream take over. In his thoughts, he wasn't stuck in some boring old classroom. He was in a grand stadium on the pitcher's mound with a horsehide ball in his hand. All around him, crowds were clapping and cheering as he tugged his cap, hiked up his knickers, and scorched batters like a pint-sized flamethrower. Eventually, the fantasy would become so big that it drifted out of his head in a puffy dream balloon and bumped up against the ceiling. And that's exactly where it would have stayed if it hadn't been for one thing: Miss Chalice. You see, in the next desk over, Miss Chalice was having a dream of her own, one that was every bit as big and bold as the real Cuphead's. This wasn't surprising. Miss Chalice knew all about the dream world. Before she became the most interesting girl on the Inkwell Isles, which she undoubtedly was, she'd been a wise and benevolent spirit called the legendary Chalice. The story of how she'd left the astral plane and become the witty, charming, happy-go-lucky best friend of Cuphead and Mugman is about an incredible, amazing, fascinating quest. But that's a tale for another day. Now where were we? Ah, yes, Miss Chalice's dream. It was a thrilling adventure in which she was driving a race car at top speed down a long, looping track. She could see herself in goggles and a helmet, gripping the wheel and zipping past rivals as she roared down the round and around the speedway. Before long, her dream, like Cuphead's, formed a puffy cloud that floated out of her head and up to the ceiling. The two dreams hovered side by side, and that's exactly where they would have stayed if there hadn't been for one other thing. Mugman. In the next desk over, Mugman's head was back and his eyes were closed, and he was soaring away on a pair of dreamy wings. You see, more than anything, Mugman wanted to be a flying ace. It was why he loved the planes he'd found in Pork Rind's store. He could imagine himself high in the sky, having dogfights and doing loop-de-loops and aerial spins. And on this particular day, his imagination carried him so high that the dream cloud flew out of the top of his head. When it reached the ceiling, which was unusually crowded that morning, it bumped against Miss Chalice's racing dream, which bashed into Cuphead's ball-playing dream, and before you knew it, three of them were floating toward the open window. Here's the thing about having big dreams in a small window. It's a tight squeeze. So tight, in fact, that the clouds tried to get through. They were squashed together in one giant super cloud filled with ballparks and racetracks and runways and all other things that popped out of the young friends' minds. But after some scooching and squirming, the dreamy blob managed to make it outside. Once there, it climbed into the air and mixed in so well with all the other big, poofy clouds that no one could even tell the difference. And that was the end of that. Or so it seemed. If only Hilda Berg hadn't chosen that exact moment to fly past the school. Oh, but you know Hilda, always buzzing around the sky like she owns the place. As a Zeppelin, she was more at home in the clouds and cut through them as easily as strolling through the park. Truth be known, she never gave it a thought. Why would she? Clouds were filled with lots and lots of fluffy, misty nothingness, and not a single thing more. Still, she did notice something odd about this cloud. For one thing, there was a big, grinning mugman flying directly at her in what looked like a wind-up toy airplane. Stunned, she veered off course only to end up on a racetrack surrounded by speeding cars, which, as you know, are rare at that altitude. Before she could pull away, Miss Chalice's dream racer blew past and whirled her into another part of the supercloud. And at the worst time possible, too. Cuphead was just about to throw the final pitch in what was sure to be a no-hitter when, bonk, he hit her. Not on purpose, of course. Hilda just happened to fly directly into the path of Cuphead's blazing fastball. So instead of thudding against the leather of a catcher's mitt, it conked against the side of her head. Dazed and discombobulated, she lost control and flew straight for the stadium scoreboard, which smack changed to Cuphead 1, Hilda 0. From there it was all downhill, literally. Hilda plunged out of the cloud and down to the ground, where she made several uncomfortable-looking bounces across the schoolyard. She wasn't badly hurt, thank goodness, but Cuphead, who was watching from the window, noticed when she walked away, her balloonish body moved in and out like a floppy accordion. I wonder what that's all about, he said. No talking, Cuphead, Professor Lucian warned. Keep your eyes on your work. Cuphead frowned, but picked up his pencil and began writing again. A few seconds later, an airplane made out of blue paper landed on his desk. It was from Mugman, who, as you know, was crazy about airplanes. Be careful, Cuphead, the note said. You can't get in trouble today. Remember, we have to get to Elder Kettle's birthday present after school. Cuphead sighed. He took out a piece of green paper and wrote, I know, then folded it into an airplane and sailed it back to Mugman. Before he could even pick up his pencil again, a purple paper airplane arrived. What are you two fellas talking about? Miss Chalice's note asked. So he pulled out a second piece of green paper and told her. Then there was another blue plane. Is Miss Chalice trying to talk to you into going to the carnival? Don't listen to her. And another purple airplane. I would never, ever try to talk you into going to the carnival on Elder Kettle's birthday, Cuphead. It does sound fun, though. Let's go. And pretty soon the classroom was filled with so many green, blue, and purple airplanes it looked like a big city airfield. Cuphead was just about to launch another note when a neatly made yellow airplane fell onto his desk. He opened it. Cuphead, you have detention. Sincerely, Professor Lucian. Thus concludes Chapter 6. Starting with Chapter 7. Nobody here but us dummies. Another nice little illustration there. It's the same people that actually developed the the video game Cuphead that did the illustrations in this book. I thought that was pretty cool. Detention? It couldn't be. Not the D word. Not today. Cuphead looked at Miss Chalice and Mugman. They were each holding a yellow letter of their own. How could this happen? How could all three of them get detention on the day they had to get to Pork Rind's shop? Cuphead stared at the agonizing note. Hopefully he'd read it wrong. He hadn't. Elder Kettle's birthday party would be ruined, and it was all his fault. This was a disaster. The next few hours crept by like a snail with nowhere to go and several lifetimes to get there. Finally, the bell rang, and everybody burst from their chairs and ran out of the classroom. Everyone except Cuphead, Miss Chalice, and Mugman. They stayed right where they were. I'm sorry, but you broke the rules, Professor Lucian said. Still, he couldn't help giving them an understanding smile. Don't worry, you'll have plenty of time to go to the carnival. I wouldn't make you miss out on all the fun and excitement. But, Cuphead said. No buts, said Lucian. I'll be over here working on an experiment, so just sit there quietly at your desks. Cuphead slumped forward. He wanted to tell the professor about Elder Kettle's surprise birthday party and how the whole town had chipped in to buy him a nice present, and why everything depended on them making it to Pork Rind's shop by 4 o'clock. He wanted to tell them they had no interest in fun and excitement and once-in-a-lifetime wonders and weren't even going to the carnival. But it was no use. When Professor Lucian was working on an experiment, he shut out everything else in the world. Cuphead watched as a brilliant bulb walked to the corner of the room and mixed colorful, strange-looking fluids in test tubes and beakers. There was no reaching him now. He was lost in a mysterious land called science. The three friends pushed their desks close together. Jeepers, we sure are in a pickle, Cuphead whispered. What are we gonna do? Maybe we could, sneak out? Mugman whispered back. I think he noticed if we were all alone in an empty room, Cuphead said. Suddenly, Professor Lucian looked up at them. Did you say something? He asked. The three of them smiled innocently and shook their heads. He went back to his experiment. Well, what if he wasn't alone? Miss Chalice asked. The boys looked confused. Who'd be here with him? Said Cuphead. We would, she said. They looked even more confused. I'll show you, she grinned. Stealthily, Miss Chalice slipped out of her desk like butter sliding off a pancake. In the blink of an eye, she blazed around the room, grabbing as many items as she could carry, then rushed back and sat down in her proper place. It's a good thing she returned when she did, because no sooner had she sat down in her chair than Professor Lucian stopped his experiment and gave them a long, probing stare. But just as before, all he saw were three perfect angels. Oh, Jesus, pardon me. But just as before, all he saw were three perfect angels smiling back at him. He raised an eyebrow, which, as anyone will tell you, is a sure sign of suspicion, but quickly put it down and went on with his work. Whew! That was close, Miss Chalice said. She pulled the spoils out of her collecting spree. There was a flower vase, a yardstick, a mop, a seat cushion, 2 paintbrushes, books of various colors and sizes, and an assortment of odds and ends that had been permanently left in the lost and found because no one wanted them back. Working at incredible speed, Miss Chalice hadn't had many talents, but she was especially good at art. She fashioned a bizarre figure out of the materials and sat it in her chair. Cuphead and Mugman stared at the creation. The resemblance was actually... There was no resemblance. It looked like a monster made entirely out of school supplies had wandered into the classroom, swallowed Miss Chalice, and taken her place in the desk. You've got to be kidding, Cuphead groaned. The professor looked up. This time, he really was suspicious. Miss Chalice quickly ducked down behind her double. Are you feeling all right, Miss Chalice? There was a long, uncomfortable silence. This was unbearable. Now he wasn't just looking at the horrible mess. He was asking questions. I'm as fit as a fiddle, Professor, she said at last. The next few seconds were excruciating. Lucian scratched the side of his bulb, then he scratched the other side, and then, for reasons only someone of his profound intellect could understand, he went back to his experiment. I can't believe that worked, said Mugman. Oh, I told you it would, Miss Chalice said. Once he starts on an experiment, he doesn't pay the slightest bit of attention to anything else, so get busy. Mugman and Cuphead eased out of their desk and wriggled across the floor like worms. They returned with a janitor's bucket, construction paper, a broom, a classroom pointer, a round large fixture, a football, and various doodads. The Owls were famous for their doodads. that they fashioned into hideous facsimiles of themselves. It's like looking in a mirror, Mugman said, except there's someone completely different looking back at you. They almost burst out laughing. It was a ridiculous plan, but what else could they do? They put the dummies in place and were sneaking away as quietly as possible when, just as they reached the window, Lucien, who seemed determined to make this escape as difficult as possible, sneezed. "Gesundheit," said Cuphead. It was a reflex, the kind of thing any well-brought-up boy would do. And so he said it without thinking. Miss Chalice slapped a hand over his mouth, but by then it was too late. They dived behind their desks just as the professor looked their way. "What's that, Cuphead? If you wish to speak, raise your hand," he said. But Cuphead did not wish to speak. He wished he'd never spoken. There was no way in the world he was going to speak again. But he had to, after all. It was only polite, so he carefully pushed up one of the clunky yardstick arms as it rose slowly into the air. He said nervously, "Gesundheit." "Oh, thank you, Cuphead," Lucien said, and went back to work. At that moment, a small, cheerful-looking red figure strolled into the classroom. It was their classmate, Mac. "Howdy," he said brightly. Ugh. I finished dusting the erasers. Of course, no one had asked him to dust the erasers, but he'd done so anyways. That was Mac, as helpful as a little apple you'd ever like to meet. He was always ready to lend a hand. "Just put them by the chalkboard, Mac," said the professor said. Miss Chalice's eyes brightened. She couldn't believe their luck. "I've got an idea," she said. She wiggled a finger at Mac. He smiled and made his way to the group. "Howdy," he said again. "Mac, do you think you could put on a puppet show?" Miss Chalice whispered. Mac's face lit up. "Can I?" he exclaimed. He pulled out a pair of sock puppets he kept around just for such an occasion. "No, I didn't mean," Miss Chalice tried to tell him, but he was too excited to notice. "What do you get when you cross a parrot with a crocodile?" one puppet asked. "Oh, I don't know, but when it talks, you better listen," the other said. "Shh," Cuphead told him. "It's not that kind of puppet show. We want you to just wiggle these dummies around whenever the professor looks over here." "Well, why didn't you say so?" Max said. "It's a piece of cake." Mugman appreciated Mac's enthusiasm, but he couldn't help being concerned. It was a big job for a little apple. "Now, only move them if he turns around. Don't go overboard, okay?" "Don't worry, it'll be a cinch," Max said. So with their fears put to rest, the three friends headed back towards the window. But just before they crawled outside, they heard a peculiar voice. "Oh, Professor! Professor!" It was coming from behind Cuphead's chair, and Mac was making it. At first they couldn't figure out what he was doing. Then, to their horror, they realized it was a terrible, terrible impersonation of Cuphead. It sounded like a scratchy record with a bad cold. The trio hit the floor just before the professor wheeled around. "What is it now, Cuphead?" Lucien asked. "Professor, I was wondering if you'd like to hear a song," the fake Cuphead said. "No!" Cuphead screamed, but Mac ignored him. "What kind of song?" asked the professor. "Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream," the apple started. His co-conspirators buried their faces in their hands, silently begging him to stop. But he didn't. Instead, he quickly moved to Miss Chalice and Mugman's dolls, who joined them in chorus. "Merrily, merrily, 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 life is but a dream." And that wasn't all. They were swaying and clapping, and a brief dance number that had to be seen to be believed. Mac flew like a wizard from dummy to dummy, sometimes doing 2, even 3 voices at a time. It was horrifying, yet oddly impressive. Cuphead knew they were done for. He just knew it. The punishment was coming, and it wouldn't be swift and severe, but just when he was about to surrender and admit the whole thing. "Very nice," said the professor, "but I'm busy right now, Cuphead. Perhaps we could do this later?" Wait, he was buying this? Cuphead and Mugman stared at Miss Chalice. She shrugged. "Oh, what can I tell you? The kid's a natural showman," she said. They shook their heads and made their way to the window. Nothing could stop them now. And yet, Miss Chalice did. "Oh my gosh," she said, then rushed back to her desk. Once there, she picked up a red crayon and colored in the round, white knob that served as counterfeit Cuphead's nose. "A perfect match," she grinned. "I can't believe we almost missed that. Why, it was as plain as the nose on your..." But before she could finish the thought, Cuphead yanked her away to the window. And as quietly as it could, the trio slipped out of the window, shimmied down the drain pipe, and were on their way. thus concludes Chapter 7. I hope you enjoyed Chapters 6 and 7. I'll be picking it up right where I left off on my next video. Have a good one. Stay inside. Try not to go too crazy with this, COVID, at the time of this recording at least. And yeah, stay safe.